The American election is far from over, notwithstanding what you may read in the newspapers and hear in the media and see on television. It cannot be assumed that President Trump has been defeated and that Mr. Biden will be the next president of the United States. He's certainly not yet the president-elect. And it's very important for us. It's important because since the settlement, we've lived in a world in which the dominant power has been benign and shared our values, first the United Kingdom and then the United States. The alternative, the power dominated by communists, which is cruel to its own people, is hardly going to be a world in which we will be able to enjoy the same freedom that we have enjoyed for so long. America remains exceptional, something downplayed by the Obama and Biden administration when they tried to preside over the gradual decline of the United States and the rise of communist China. And why is America exceptional? She's exceptional not because of her people, but because of her foundation documents and her foundation principle, which was downplayed by Obama, downplayed by Biden too. And this is, as the Declaration of Independence says, we believe these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator. Note, by their creator, not by governments, not by monarchs, not by politicians, but as a natural right, by their creator, with certain unalienable rights, rights which cannot be taken away from them. The rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is something which was behind the English Glorious Revolution of 1688, found in the writings of John Locke, but the Americans were the first to put it in their foundation document and to live by it. But there's a warning here. As Ronald Reagan said, freedom is never more than one generation away. Each generation has to fight for its freedom. And that is the problem in the United States. And it is clear that, like Churchill after Dunkirk, Trump will never surrender. You can be sure that he will observe the Constitution to the letter, but he will never surrender. What we're seeing in the United States is obvious fraud on an industrial scale. And for those journalists, so-called journalists in the United States who say they cannot see any fraud, the fraud is self-evident. You do not stop scrutineers coming in, or you do not allow them to come in, but do not allow them meaningful scrutiny by pushing them away too far, unless you're hiding something. It's not because of their bad breath. It's because you don't want them to see what you're up to. It is self-evident. The scrutineers are being kept out, that counting was stopped when it appeared as if the president had won. Counting was stopped, and then truckloads of fraudulent ballots were brought in with the scrutineers absent and the scrutineers kept out during the counting. When the Trump legal team tried to brief the media on this, the reaction was predictable. The media chanted as one person, all this is unsubstantiated. Where is the evidence? Yet, the Trump legal team has reams of affidavits sworn under penalty of perjury. That is to say, if any mistake is made, if anything untrue is said in the affidavit, those people can end up in jail, and they would, because the Democrats will pursue them. And they have masses of evidence demonstrating that there has been significant fraud in this election, and that the fraud resulted in the surprise to the Democrats that the landslide to President Trump was so large, and certainly far beyond the false polls, which were predicting all sorts of ridiculous advances for Mr. Biden. The enthusiasm was clearly on the side of President Trump, and if you have enthusiasm on one side, it clearly indicates that that side is going to prevail. But there is massive amounts of evidence, not only of fraud, but of significant constitutional breaches which were used in 2000 in the Bush versus Gore case, where President Bush was declared president over Vice President Gore. And these demonstrate that in breach of American law, different electors have been treated differently by the electoral authorities. And in addition, some of the electoral authorities have attempted to change the electoral law in breach of the Constitution, because the Constitution puts the right of making the electoral law in the camp of the state legislatures, and nobody else can change that law. Yet, dictates have been issued by state secretaries of state and state governors and electoral boards changing the law, which will have no effect. This is not over, and calls for Trump to concede are ridiculous. They are as ridiculous as calls to Churchill to effectively surrender to Hitler after Dunkirk. This is not what should happen, and it's not just what should happen in relation to the return of President Trump, it's in relation to future elections, because if this is allowed to continue, if this fraud on an industrial scale is allowed to survive this time, then it will continue for decades hence. And this will ensure the decline of America, the rise of communist China, and the fact that the new president is compromised in his relations with China in the past because of the Biden's family enterprise of selling access and influence in Washington right into the office of the vice president when he was vice president, indicates that he has been seriously compromised. As I say, the election is not over. Don't believe what you're hearing in the media. If you want to get a balanced report, go to the Epoch Times, the New York-based newspaper, which has an Australian edition and which is giving very fair and balanced reports concerning the court cases which are gradually being unleashed by the Trump team and other legal teams who object to the massive fraud, the fraud on an industrial scale, the unconstitutionality and the breaches of state law which have been perpetrated to bring this false result about. This is important not only for the United States, it's important for all of us, including the Commonwealth of Australia. So Australians, take back your country.